play in the reunification of the country. People wanted to know, well, this was a soothing balm for people's conscience to have their dead buried in these national cemeteries, these big, peaceful, commendable cemeteries. But what happened to the people who would come to the cemeteries and remember the dead? What did it do politically? There's been a lot of debate about that. Some people would say that it completely soothed over sectional tensions, that in the years following the Civil War, Northerners and Southerners would come to each other's cemeteries, would kind of do the, shaking hands over the stone wall and talk about the glorious charge and how great all of the soldiers were who fought and died during the war. Some people staunchly adhere to that. Other people will say that, yes, that did happen. North and South was reunited. But in the process of these people coming together in the cemeteries and talking about how great it was, fighting against each other, it was the best character of men that you saw come out in Civil War battles, people would also say that this covered over the latent racial tensions hanging along from the Civil War. That while North and South could be reunited over this glorious death and talking about the good old days as soldiers, they would ignore the very problem that was so intrinsic in causing the war, slavery, what to do with the free African American population. So some of that, of course, is true from each position. Then we have other people who have suggested, other historians, who suggested that these cemeteries actually became a point of rivalry between North and South. That Southern cemeteries would kind of design their cemeteries to be designed in a certain way, kind of flashy, flamboyant, more elegant than Northern cemeteries, which were considered very, serene and very kind of stately, not very flamboyant or flashy. And that this created competition between the North and the South, saying, yeah, all of our dead were honorable, but we honor our dead in the best way. So again, what's this doing to the political situation? We have to consider that. It's not just the burial of the dead, but how people who come to the cemeteries kind of internalize what they see here. In most recent work, historical work, there's been a historian who some of you may know, Drew Gilpin Faust, who's wrote a book called This Republic of Suffering. And she talks about the most famous repercussion, or the most notable repercussion of the National Cemetery System, and kind of this coming to terms with death, was becoming, as the one soldier noted, somewhat numbed to death. Kind of turning away from this concept of the noble warrior, the good death, and imagining death in a different way. Becoming okay with death in less intimate, less familial terms, and more stately, more formal terms on a more political basis. Now, all of these things might have truth to them. The reunification of North and South, perhaps the glossing over of the original tensions in the war, perhaps a different attitude toward death in general caused by these national cemeteries and these big cemeteries in general. But the important thing to remember is that these cemeteries still serve a purpose. And the reason why I stopped here is if you guys look down here, you will see the name on this stone. It'll be Michael Folland, and he was a Medal of Honor winner. He was the only Medal of Honor winner buried here at Glendale, only 20 years old when he died in Vietnam. And he dies July 3rd, 1969, so we're coming up on the anniversary of that. And the certificate that went along with his Medal of Honor stated this: Michael Fleming Folland, Vietnam 3rd Infantry, 199th Infantry Brigade, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty. Corporal Folland distinguished himself while serving as an ammunition bearer with the weapons platoon of Company D during a reconnaissance patrol mission. As the patrol was moving through a dense jungle area, it was caught in an intense crossfire from heavily fortified and concealed enemy ambush positions. As the patrol reacted to neutralize the ambush, it became evident that the heavy weapons could not be used in the cramped fighting area. Corporal Folland dropped his recoilless rifle ammunition and ran forward to join his commander in an assault on the enemy bunkers. The assaulting force moved forward until it was pinned down directly in front of the heavily fortified bunkers by machine gun fire. Corporal Folland stood up to draw enemy fire on himself and to place suppressive fire on the enemy positions, while his commander attempted to destroy the machine gun positions with grenades. Before the officer could throw a grenade, an enemy grenade landed in the position. Corporal Folland alerted his comrades and his commander hurled the grenade from the position. When a second enemy grenade landed here, Corporal Folland again shouted a warning to his fellow soldiers, but seeing that no one could reach the grenade and realizing that it was about to explode, Corporal Folland, with complete disregard for his safety, threw himself on the grenade. By his dauntless courage, Corporal Folland saved the lives of his comrades, although he was mortally wounded by the explosion. Corporal Folland's extraordinary heroism at the cost of his life was in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflects great credit upon himself, his unit, and the U.S. Army. Now, oftentimes we get visitors to this cemetery whose grandfather, great-grandfather, uncle perhaps is buried here. But every year, the brother of Corporal Folland comes here to this grave. He spends some time here and he puts some flowers down in front of the grave. Very powerful moment. I think it nicely ties up, it brings to full circle why this place is so important, why the National Cemetery System is so important, and how it has so incredibly evolved since its first few days. Our conceptions of death have certainly changed since the Civil War, as Drew Faust has said in her book. In fact, think of the way that we encounter death today with soldiers coming back from the battlefields. We're not allowed to see dead bodies. We just see the coffins with the American flags on them. Look at the amount of deaths that our soldiers are experiencing in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's nothing like what we had in the Civil War. Imagine trying to cope with that. Imagine being a Victorian, for instance, and trying to cope with the enormous amount of increase in the deaths that we have. So again, very different conceptions of death today, but what's important to remember is that because of what happened during the Civil War, because of those political needs, because of those psychological needs, we have places for people like Corporal Folland to be buried. He's from this area, he's local, so he's able to be buried at home. Remember that idea of the good death, that fear of being buried away from friends and family, you can't be visited by them, the family and friends can't visit the soldier. Not the case for Corporal Folland. His brother comes every year. Imagine what kind of soothing balm that is for the Folland family. What we know is that today the National Cemetery System that really starts in places like Glendale, Malvern Hill, and the other Civil War battlefields continues to serve the political and humane needs of the country. And that's what is so incredibly important about this place. This remarkable system that wasn't even thought of before the war, that has evolved into places like Glendale today. I leave you guys with a quote. I think it's one of my favorites actually, because it so poignantly sums up the haunting and kind of lonely beauty of this place. As I said, we don't get many visitors here. It's too bad. Because it's such an important place, you guys have heard some of the stories here today. You guys have heard about the larger significance of it. But this is perhaps one of my all-time favorite quotes describing just how beautiful this place is. And it's often rarely visited by passers-by. It's from an account from a man named Clarence McCartney. And he visits Glendale Cemetery in the early 1900s. So the cemetery is maybe 45 years old by this point. And he writes, "Suddenly I came upon the walls of the cemetery and saw the flag of the nation floating over the pines and live oaks. I used to feel when I visited other national cemeteries that there was a sad difference between the graves of the known and the unknown dead. But today, in this solitary cemetery, in the midst of the swamps, I felt that there was little difference. All alike, whether with name and regiment and state noted or just with a number, were now unknown. Of all the cemeteries I have visited, this seemed to me the saddest, the loneliest. Few ever pass by the cemetery by that road through the swamps, and fewer still pause to enter the gate and look upon the graves of the heroic dead. Such is the irony of war. The great war comes, the drums beat, and the crowds cheer and throw their kisses and strew their roses. When the smoke is lifted, mangled, dehumanized forms are collected and buried together in long rows. White stones are put over the graves and a wall is built around them. Once a year on Memorial Day, survivors of a regiment may meet and an oration is made. Then silence and oblivion for another year. As the years pass, the soldiers' sacrifice and suffering and death are forgotten, despite our eloquent periods about the immortal dead. Whenever I hear the martial music and the rattle of the accoutrements and see the glinting of the sun on the cannon and hear the huzzas of the multitude or listen to the glowing periods of the patriotic orator, I see, as in a vision, that quiet little cemetery with the ivy walls sheltering the graves yonder in the wilderness. Thank you guys so much for coming out on the program today. If you guys have any questions, I'll be around.
Was Glendale the first national cemetery in the South?
It was not, actually. No, there are other cemeteries actually in kind of the deep South that came to being first.
All right. I grew up in Hampton, Virginia. We had a veteran